The People's Liberation Army's Academy of Military Medical Science was granted access to work in the government's Winnipeg lab.
There's no reason for Ottawa to be secretive about this.
Transfer of Ebola and Nipah viruses to the Wuhan Institute of Virology in March 2019.
Ottawa needs to explain what happened. Chu, her husband, and her students from China were evicted from Canada's only Level 4 lab, their security access revoked.
We already know that they've sent Ebola virus to China and that they're working with the Chinese military scientists. This is known.
Today, we're diving headfirst into what might be one of the biggest cover-ups in recent Canadian political history, the Winnipeg Lab scandal. While everyone was focused on the US election, the Canadian government quietly released a report on a story that's been under wraps for years. This isn't just about national security. It's about a government doing everything that it can to hide the truth from Canadians. Today, we're asking a hard question. What exactly was the Liberal government hiding from us?
This story starts at the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg, a high-security lab dealing with the world's deadliest pathogens. In 2019, two scientists, Dr. Zhengguo Chu and her husband, Keding Cheng, were escorted out of the lab by the RCMP. The reason? Alleged security breaches and links to China. What followed was a series of stunning events. A government refusing to release documents, a Speaker of the House being sued by his own government, and a snap election seemingly timed to make this entire story disappear. So what we're about to show you is an extract from the report, which includes, in our opinion, the most important information that you can actually glean from this, which is what happened, when it happened, and how it happened.
And as always, there's going to be a link to the full report in the description of the video, and we encourage you to go and read it for yourself. June 2003, Zhengguo Chu begins working as a research scientist for the Public Health Agency of Canada, or PHAC, Winnipeg's National Microbiology Laboratory facility. Her husband, Keding Cheng, starts working there in 2006.
In 2013, Keding Cheng fills out an application for the Science and Technology Innovation Talent Program for Henan Province. Now, this wasn't just any program. It had a requirement that applicants, quote, passionately love the socialist motherland, end quote. That's the People's Republic of China, folks. No word on whether he submitted it, but we can only guess that he did, considering he would end up working as a Chinese spy in Canada's most secure bio-research lab.
2016. Dr. Chu is nominated for an International Cooperation Award by an official from the Chinese Academy of Military Medical Sciences. The frightening part is that the person nominating her was linked to China's top biological weapons defense programs. Just think about that for a second. Canada's top infectious disease scientist collaborating with the top virologists from the Chinese military.
October 2016. Dr. Chu publishes a paper with Major General Chen Wei of the PLA, basically China's chief biological weapons expert. That collaboration raises serious national security flags.
March 2017. The Public Health Agency of Canada, or PHAC, approves Dr. Chu's travel to China for a conference in Beijing. She also visits the Wuhan Institute of Virology, presenting on, quote, combating Ebola virus infection, end quote. PHAC wasn't aware of this trip, and the Wuhan Institute of Virology reportedly paid her for her expenses.
September 2018. PHAC's National Security Management Division is alerted that Dr. Chu is listed as an inventor on a Chinese patent. The concern was that this might contain scientific information developed at the Winnipeg Lab.
December 21st, 2018. PHAC contracts Presidia Security Consulting to investigate Dr. Chu and Mr. Cheng. At this point, the government's suspicions were clearly high enough to bring in outside investigators. But even with suspicions, their access remains intact and nothing happened.
March 31st, 2019. The Winnipeg Lab facility shipped samples of Ebola and henipaviruses to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This was done with government approval. It doesn't get more serious than sending our most dangerous pathogens to a lab associated with the Chinese military. The same lab that ended up losing containment of COVID-19.
July 5th, 2019. The RCMP escorts Dr. Chu and Mr. Cheng out of the Winnipeg lab. They're told to stay home with pay while the investigation continued.
February 5th, 2020. Presidia Security Consulting completes its administrative investigation report on Dr. Chu and Mr. Cheng, submitting it to PHAC. That means by early 2020, the government had plenty of information on the situation.
April 9th, 2020. CSIS submits a security assessment on Dr. Chu and Mr. Cheng to PHAC. The assessment essentially says that if these two scientists return to the Winnipeg lab, they could be a national security threat. This was a huge warning, and yet the government didn't act right away.
June 14th, 2020. CBC publishes an article revealing that Dr. Zhengguo Chu oversaw the shipment of deadly viruses to the Wuhan Institute of Virology in March of 2019. The shipment included 2 vials each of 15 strains of Ebola and henipaviruses. The article reports that Dr. Chu, her husband Keding Chang, and several Chinese students were escorted from the lab by the RCMP in July of 2019.
June 30th, 2020. CSIS updates its security assessment on Dr. Chu. The assessment is even stronger this time, saying that her behavior is incompatible with holding a government security clearance. CSIS said she could jeopardize Canada's national security if allowed back into the lab. They mention she may have, quote, outright lied, end quote, during her interview.
July 7th, 2020. CSIS issues an updated assessment on Mr. Cheng. It's just as damning as the one for Dr. Chu, saying he could act in a way that threatens Canada's national security if he returns to the lab.
August 5th, 2020. Dr. Chu and Mr. Cheng filed grievances alleging the investigation process violated their rights. This puts the government in an even tighter spot, especially as more information about these two becomes public.
February 5th, 2021. CBC News reports that Dr. Zhengguo Chu and her husband, Keding Chang, have been terminated from the Public Health Agency of Canada as of January 20th, 2021. The couple had been under investigation since July 2019, when they were escorted from the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg amid concerns of a possible policy breach. PHAC has not disclosed specific reasons for their dismissal, citing confidentiality.
March 31st, 2021. The House of Commons Special Committee on Canada-China Relations adopts a motion ordering PHAC to release unredacted documents relating to Dr. Chu and Mr. Cheng's dismissal. But the government ignored it.
I move the following motion, that the committee order the production of all information and documents in the possession of the Public Health Agency of Canada or any subsidiary organizations relating to the transfer of Ebola and henipaviruses to the Wuhan Institute of Virology in March 2019 and the subsequent revocation of security clearance for and termination of the employment of Dr. Zhengguo Chu and Keding Chang. We have a situation in which deadly viruses were sent from a Canadian lab to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a lab in China with connections to the Chinese military, which engages in so-called gain-of-function experiments. Gain-of-function experiments are experiments whereby efforts are made to make a virus more deadly or more contagious for research purposes. Concerns about the security protocols of this lab had been previously raised by American officials. Needless to say, the sending of viruses from a Canadian lab to a Chinese military-affiliated lab which does gain-of-function experiments raises serious questions for national security and global health, questions which are germane to this committee's current study on national security in the context of the Canada-China relationship. Shortly after the transmission of these viruses, scientists involved were expelled from the Winnipeg lab for alleged policy breaches. That's all we know, policy breaches. But we are still being told that the export of viruses aligned with protocols, and we still don't know exactly why the scientists were expelled. During our last meeting, MPs from all opposition parties sought answers to these questions from Ian Stewart, President of the Public Health Agency of Canada. Questions were asked at both the general and specific level. For example, my questions did not mention the cases of the specific scientists involved. I asked the following question. Mr. Stewart, has there ever been a case where any lab has fired scientists as a result of security breaches or the improper transfer of viruses? He refused to answer that question. I repeated, Mr. Stewart, this is a critical issue of national security. Has any lab in this country ever fired a scientist as a result of a security breach or the improper transfer of viruses? You're a public servant. People deserve an answer. Again, he refused to answer.
May 10th, 2021. Parliament issues another order. The government does not comply.
June 2nd, 2021. The House adopts yet another motion for the documents. The Liberals double down, again saying no.
Mr. Chong, seconded by Mr. Deltel, moved that an order of the House to issue for the unredacted version of all documents produced by the Public Health Agency of Canada in response to the March 31st, 2021 and May 10th, 2021 orders of the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations respecting the transfer of Ebola and Henipa virus to the Wuhan Institute of Virology in March 2019 and the subsequent revocation of security clearance for and termination of employment of Dr. Zhangguo Kui and Dr. Kering Cheng.
Yeas pour 179, 179. Nays contre 149, 149.
I declare the motion carried.
June 17th, 2021. Speaker of the House, Anthony Rota, a Liberal, rules that the government is now in contempt. He formally orders them to release the documents.
July 2nd, 2021. Instead of complying with the order, Trudeau's government does something shocking. They sue the House Speaker, Anthony Rota. They literally take their own speaker to court rather than hand over the documents. This is unheard of in Canadian history.
August 15th, 2021. Unable to shake the scandal and realizing they may be legally ordered to hand over the documents, Trudeau calls a snap election. And just like that, the fight over these documents is over. Every committee demand, every court order, everything goes quiet.
And this is where it all comes together. The government delayed action from the start, failed to restrict access to the lab, ignored security warnings, and fought tooth and nail to keep documents hidden from the public. The report confirms these failures, showing a government that dodged accountability every single step of the way. And yet, this isn't even the full story.
Think about what we've seen here. The Liberal government actually sued its own speaker to keep those Winnipeg Lab documents secret. Then they called a snap election, putting everything on pause. And now, while Canadians are focused on the US election, they quietly release the report, hoping that nobody will notice. And to top it all off, here we go again. Parliament is now seized with the SDTC scandal, and yet another speaker has ordered the Trudeau government to hand over another set of documents. But once again, they are refusing to do so.
It's disturbing. This isn't just about mishandling one national security issue. It's about a government actively fighting transparency. The lengths that they are willing to go to in order to avoid accountability should make every single Canadian in this country wonder. If they're willing to cover up what happened in Winnipeg, what else are they hiding?
So what did this report essentially say? Well, there's many recommendations that came out of this report. Some are to create some new bureaucratic positions to give people accountability, to be liaisons between different agencies, different departments. Some of the other recommendations were around security protocols. Some of the other recommendations are, naming different research organizations to this existing list that they have. But here's the thing. Obviously, they didn't vet these people well enough. And this is considering the entire backdrop of the fact that we're in the middle of a foreign interference public inquiry on China.
Well, and that's bad enough, but I think the most egregious part of all of this is that this government that came in 2015 and tried to label itself as the most transparent government ever is seemingly doing everything that it can to hide the facts of this incident and bury this investigation and hide it from Canadians.
Right, because this is serious. This is incredibly serious. You essentially allowed 2 Chinese spies to get very significant and deadly viruses out of our most secure bio research lab, take them back to China, to a lab that is now known to commit an oops in letting dangerous viruses out of their containment.
Well, and like I said the other day on our live stream, it's going to be germs that are going to be the biggest threat to Canada and Canadians. So the fact that these 2 agents, we'll call them, took one of our most deadly viruses, I believe that Ebola has a death rate of something like 80%, that they were able to take that plus related Henipavirus out of the lab and send it to a military lab essentially in China. Like, that is huge.
Well, and that's the thing. It seems like these agents are working for essentially China's Bio-Research Weapons Defense Division. That's the thing to consider here.
But the government tried to hide it. They
Right.
tried to cover it up so that we would never know.
And the world would never know. That's the other thing. And Trudeau wonders. He wonders why the Allies don't trust him when it comes to China. Don't trust this Liberal government when it comes to China. He wonders why Canadians don't trust this government when it comes to anything. Because all they've done is lie and lie and lie and prevent us from knowing the truth. And they're doing it all over again with the SDTC scandal. And it prompts the question, what else has gone on that we don't even know about yet and you have no intention of telling us? We need to keep asking the tough questions. This government may try to bury the truth, but we're here to dig it up. And we're not about to let this story disappear in the shadow of an election cycle. Because the truth needs a voice.